First, the third half hour Gr12 choice 1 and 2 to 9th of July starts.
Okay. So in terms of the organisms that you have to know, this is the first one you have to know. You have to be able to spell this word. Okay, so we're talking about Australopithecines. So not so much that word, but the actual examples that I'm going to give you. So many of the hominids which evolved and diversified in Africa about 4 million years ago have produced fossils. So there's really, really good fossil evidence in Africa. And we're going to look at two main groups of Australopithecines, and they're from two main regions. I should have put these the other way around. The one group is in southern Africa, and this is Australopithecus africanus. Okay, from South Africa. You've got to get it right, which one evolved first and which one came from which region. And then the second one is from East Africa, and it's Australopithecus afarensis. And the way, Matthew, that you're going to remember this is that this one came from a faraway place. So afarensis came from a faraway place. In fact, it came from the Afar region, which is in Ethiopia, and that's where the name came from. But you can remember it as being from a faraway place. Yep.
Which one evolved first?
This one, and that's why I said I should have put this one first. Okay. So first of all, we're going to talk about Australopithecus afarensis, and the first fossil that was found is a fossil with the common name of Lucy. So very often, the very first fossil of a particular group of organisms is given a common name. That particular fossil, that actual one, that one, is given a common name by which it is referred. No, that's bad English. That's used to talk about it. Okay, so instead of people having to talk about Australopithecus afarensis all the time, they can just talk about that particular one was called Lucy. Okay. All right. Lucy was found in the Awash Valley in Ethiopia. You guys know where Ethiopia is? That's a really good answer there.
I said East Africa.
Okay, right. So you know the little part that sticks out of Africa?
That's like rhino hornbirds.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Ethiopia is there. I'll show you a map now. This particular fossil, not all Australopithecus afarensis are 3.2 million years ago, but Lucy is that old. The actual fossil that was found is a 40% complete skeleton. Lucy is 1 meter tall, even shorter than I am. And Australopithecus afarensis existed as a species for at least 1 million years. Matt, focus.
It's a man that's this tall. Like, like this, like that.
Yeah, so I'm 1'5", and so if you take a third off of my height, so pretty short. Okay. So there you've got a map of Africa, and this starred region here. So there's Ethiopia. Not the actual hornbit, because that's Somalia. But that starred region is the Awash Valley. And this is part of the Great Rift Valley, and conditions for formation of fossils was excellent in this region. So you're going to see that as I go through examples and examples, they all found in a line going down here, because that was where this part of Africa is actually moving away from the rest of Africa. It's drifting off in that direction. And so excellent conditions for the formation of fossils. Okay, so remember, you don't have to know it, but quite an interesting story that might help you remember the name of this particular skeleton. So that's the bones of this fossil actually laid out when they excavated it, and they brushed off and used dental drills to get rid of all the rock and whatever. This was the bones of the fossils laid out like that. And this skeleton was spotted by Donald Johansen, don't have to know that, and he and another paleontologist were traveling through that particular region. And as they were driving along, he said, no, hold on, stop. They went on a different route to the route that they normally went on that particular day. And he spotted it from the vehicle, and he made the other guy stop, and it took 2 weeks to excavate, and there was huge excitement when they had excavated it, and the paleontologists realized how important it was, and there was lots of drinking and dancing and singing. And remember, they probably had a record player or something there, and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which was a very famous Beatles song, was played over and over again during that night of celebration when they realized the importance of what they had found. And at that stage of the game, somebody said, this particular fossil of Australopithecus afarensis should be called Lucy. And so Lucy was the name that is used to refer to this particular one.
Ma'am, you said Donald Johansen saw the skeleton like from a distance.
It might have been, I'm not saying necessarily a distance, it might have been right at the side of the road as he was travelling along.
But wouldn't it be like, yeah.
But remember that what happens is with erosion, fossils that are deep down are actually brought up to the surface and exposed. And that's how most fossils are found. Okay, or with movements, plate, with folding and that kind of thing. Okay, now this is quite important, that if we look at the reconstructions of these things, so they will find a fossil, then they'll put it all together and they'll reconstruct it. And all of this light there and there and there and there, that side of the pelvic girdle and these parts of the legs are filled in. So they don't find fossil bits of those parts. And you can see that here with this particular one. Not breaking thing. That these bits that are lighter in color here were not found in this original fossil. So they've been filled in, and what they very often do is if they've got one half, then they know what the other half looked like. And they could certainly do that with Lucy, because if you look at it, they've got this femur, but the lower leg of that side. So they would be able to mirror image this side and mirror image that side. Okay, and predict what it would look like. Okay. So adaptations in Lucy's hip, her leg, and her foot showed that she was had a fully bipedal means of locomotion. And then they used a method that is very similar to what they do at cold cases and crime scenes. You know, if they find a skull of someone, then what they can do is actually cover it. Certain experts are able to cover that and produce a face that they reckon for that bone structure, this is what the face would probably have looked like. And that's what they have done. I'm going to show you a number of reconstructions. So this is what they feel that Lucy would have looked like. Okay, but quite well bipedal. But look how long the arms are Okay, and so quite a lot of climbing, did quite a lot of climbing around in trees, etc. Okay, so there's an Australopithecus afarensis compared to humans. Look at the length of the arm versus the length of the leg. So remember, you would take your fingers and go like that and go, the arms are longer than the legs, or the arms are 1/3 as long as the legs, etc., etc. You don't have to measure it as actual measurements on a ruler. This kind of pectoral girdle was very good for climbing trees. Okay, so there's another. Longer toes with the big toe at an angle, which tells you that they climbed, whereas humans, an enlarged heel bone. That's because the whole walk bipedally, land on the heel, push off with the toe. Longer leg bones, okay. S-shaped vertebral column, they call it a spine. Please try and remember to call it a vertebral column. Okay. Smaller jaw, etc., etc. Okay. All right. Very, very, very famous footprints. These footprints give evidence of how Australopithecus afarensis walked. So while they can look at the skeleton of the particular organism, especially a construction, they are hypothesizing with this bone structure, this is how the individual walked.
Sorry, ma'am. For the skeleton, you said where they have to fill it in. If you just go to the previous slide, is it not the black bits that are folded?
No. So,
because if you look at what they have over there and then what they have in the next slide, I think it looks like the black bits that are folded.
yeah, on this thing you're right, is the black bits.
So
It's normally lighter.
Okay.
So in the ones that I'll go to, no, you're right. I apologize. In the ones that we go to after this, it's the light. It's the light one. Sorry, you're correct. Okay. So these particular footprints are found in volcanic ash. And I'm going to show you a video now. They're 45 kilometers south of a really famous gorge which had lots and lots of fossils, Olduvai Gorge. The footprints were made in volcanic ash, and you know, I hope, that when volcanoes erupt, there's always a lot of condensation of moisture from the air, and quite often volcanic ash ends up as being almost like cement, liquid cement. And it's really, really good for making fossils. So these footprints are 3.6 million years old, and it's a 27-meter long trail of an adult and a juvenile walking upright, and it's very evident, and I'll show you the movie. Some other animal prints across theirs, they're very different from chimpanzee prints, and they show a foot arch typical of modern humans. And this is Australopithecus afarensis. And here's the Olduvai Gorge there. Okay? And remember, it's along the Great Rift Valley, where this part of Africa is separating from this part of Africa. And I said to you before that that was where Lucy came from, the Awash Valley, and that Great Rift Valley goes down there, and you know about the Great Lakes here, being part of the Great Rift Valley, going right down to Mozambique. Then that's just a bigger, it shows you very famous fossil finds going down there, and then Sturgeon and tongue in Southern Africa, South Africa. Okay, so this is what the Latoya footprints look like. They were discovered in 1978, and they proved that hominids were bipedal walkers at least 3.6, 3.5 million years ago, and most scientists feel that these particular footprints were fossils from Australopithecus afarensis.
Wait, ma'am.
I'm listening.
Does that mean that they were just walking while a volcano was doing its thing?
Say again?
Was
Oh,
that-
no. So, no, because then the ash would have been too hot to walk on, probably. Is ash as hot as lava? Not as hot as lava. No. So, within a period of time after the eruption of the thing. Okay. Right.
The volcano behind me was belching out ash, which covered the entire landscape. And it was in that ash that the most evocative discovery of all was made. These are the fossilized tracks of ancient rhino and antelope here at Latoya in Tanzania. And among them are the footprints of an ape. A very remarkable ape. Scientists maintain that they can deduce from the shape of bones the posture of the living animal, but there will always be arguments. Here, however, is proof positive that 3.5 million years ago, mankind's ancestors were walking on 2 feet upright. Here's the dent made by the heel as it hit the ground, the raised instep, and the big toe, instead of pointing outwards from the foot, as is needed if you're going to climb trees, is lined forward to give the final push-off. But the exciting thing about Latoya is that there is a whole trackway of prints, and they have fossilized behavior and revealed family life in a way that is almost disturbingly familiar. 2 individuals, one slightly larger than the other, perhaps male and female, appear to have been walking beside one another, maybe even arm in arm. The male's footprints are scuffed by a smaller set of prints, perhaps made by a child, walking through the newly fallen volcanic ash and treading in the steps of its father. The big question, of course, is why did they stand upright? There have been a number of suggestions. One is that it was to get a better view of the surroundings, to spot for danger or for prey. Maybe it was to release the hands, to use tools or pick up food or hold a baby. And there's a third, rather more controversial suggestion. About 6 million years ago, the climate of the Earth became very erratic. The great African forests began to die
I don't think
back.
I can.
The blanket of trees became broken by patches of scrub and grass.
Sorry,
There's some evidence, too, that slow movements in the Earth's crust caused areas of East Africa to flood. A new habitat had appeared for the apes. Using their long, chimp-like arms, these early creatures were still climbing trees in order to find their food. But as the forest diminished, so they had to travel farther from one tree to the next, and that involved crossing open spaces covered with grass or even water. And to do that, they traveled upright on 2 feet, as I'm doing.
Yeah. Look at them rocking from side to side as she walks.
Suddenly, an image from our remote past comes vividly to light. The time when our distant ancestors, in order to keep up with the changing environment, had to wade and keep their heads above water in order to find food. That crucial moment when our far distant ancestors took a step away from being apes and a step towards humanity. Apes are
Look at that
primarily
divergent
adapted
big
for
toe
life
on
in
that
the
baby.
trees, which is why they waddle if they try to walk upright. It's tiring for them to stand on 2 feet for any length of time. But when they wade, the water supports their bodies and takes some of the strain off their leg muscles so that they can stay upright for much longer. life at the water's edge encouraged anatomical change. At about this time, the hip bones of these early ape men altered, and our ancestors adopted an upright existence.
So I seem to have lost my really good example of a chimpanzee walking bipedally. So this is not an ideal one, but it does show you certain things that will help you. So you need to look at the fact when this chimpanzee starts to walk upright, that it walks in a rocking kind of way, and that's to do with the position of the acetabulum and the way in which the femur lies, that it doesn't lie underneath with the knee underneath the body, that the femur juts outwards a little bit. You can see the bonus of having hands to carry things. Okay. Okay. You happy with the
Oh my gosh.
the importance of the Latoya footprints? So the fact that it showed that the Australopithecines were bipedal, that they walked in a similar way to us, landing on the heel, pushing off at the toe, big toe, or the toes, and that the big toe lies parallel to the other toes. And it was thought that the landscape at that stage of the game looked like this. So it was changing from being a region with lots of trees to being a region with fewer trees and more grass. And so there was a lot of fruit and there were seeds, and these individuals were able to gather fruit and seeds. So the characteristics of Australopithecus afarensis. Now let's just talk about this. So a scientific name, remember, always two words, a genus name and a species name. Remember that the genus name is always written with a capital letter, species name all lowercase, and when you handwrite it, you underline it. The whole thing, if they just ask you the genus name, you write just the genus name and underline it. And if they ask you the species name, just the species name and underline it. Now, one of the things that is shown here is that it is possible, if you have written the entire genus and species name somewhere else, so this is a bit like the whole DNA thing. Remember, you may not abbreviate unless you've written the whole thing out, the whole name out, and in brackets done the abbreviation, and after that, for the rest of that exam, you're allowed to use the abbreviation. Now, it's exactly the same here. You write the first time, Australopithecus afarensis. After that, you're allowed to abbreviate Australopithecus. Now, generally speaking, Australopithecus is abbreviated as capital A with a full stop. The full stop shows an abbreviation there. However, you might see it written as capital A, small u. So, Australopithecus afarensis. And the reason why in some scientific papers you see it abbreviated like this is that in terms of evolution, there was a hominid that existed just before Australopithecus, and it was called Ardipithecus. I hope that's how you spell it. And so because this one evolved before this one, Ardipithecus is abbreviated as capital A, and Australopithecus is often abbreviated as AU, simply because this one evolved before that one did. But because you don't have to study Ardipithecus, it's okay for you to call Australopithecus capital A, abbreviated as capital A, as long as you write the whole name out first, and then in brackets go that you're going to abbreviate it as A after that. Okay. So what are the characteristics? The arms were relatively long, the legs relatively short. So that word relatively is important because it's comparing the length of the arms to the length of the legs. And that suggests that they did a certain amount of tree dwelling or arboreal lifestyle. Remember, arboreal means climbing in trees. They had very thick enamel on their teeth because they ate tough plant material. They were bipedal, which is shown by their skull and the pelvic girdle. And talking about the skull, what you have to know is the position of the foramen magnum and also pelvic girdle fragments. Big toe diverges slightly, which aided in tree climbing. They had a small cranium, average size of the brain 445 cubic centimeters. Now remember that what they would do to measure the size of the brain is take a skull, okay, close off all the foraminae, okay, plug them with plasticine or whatever, and fill the skull, either with a liquid or with sand, until the skull was full. And then what they would do is pour that out into, say, a measuring cylinder and measure the volume. And then that would indicate the size of the internal cavity of the cranium, which implied that the brain was that size.
Did they use a replica of the skull, no? Isn't it like...
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah. Because those things are very precious. Okay.
Is that a real one?
No, it's very, no, they're all replicas.
Oh, okay.
But heavens, no. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go on to the Southern African example of Australopithecus, and this is Australopithecus. Yeah, this is, okay. Africanus, which remember comes from South Africa, Southern Africa, and the first example was the Taung child. So in 1924, the skull of a child was discovered by a very famous guy called Raymond Dart, found in Taung, north of Kimberley. It lived 2.4 to 3 million years ago. That's what its age was. The Taung child was a 3-year-old child. The foramen magnum is underneath and nearer the front of the skull, and that shows it was a bipedal. And then very interestingly, it had strange holes in the skull, which they've since been able to say it was killed by an eagle. So it was picked up by an eagle, and that was how it was killed probably. So this is the actual fossil of the Taung child, Australopithecus africanus. And it's got, as I said, it's got big holes in the skull. And a little while ago, somebody said, you know what those holes are? It's an eagle's talons. And they took a stuffed eagle and they held it over and showed that the talons would actually fit perfectly into those little holes. And therefore, that was what had killed this little child. Okay, so this was the famous Raymond Dart, the actual Taung child thing. And then this is just a reconstruction of what they think that the Taung child would have looked like. Okay. Second really famous. So